Last night, Don Lemon was arrested by federal agents in connection with a protest he was covering at a Minnesota church. And it raises a ton of questions about authoritarianism, free speech, and the importance of independent journalism. But I want to talk about something that's kind of underneath all of that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. It's something that most people aren't seeing yet. What if the biggest threat to truth isn't censorship anymore? What if it's something that's a little bit more discreet, something that doesn't require a villain at all? I'm Angela Benton, and this is Thinking in Public, where I process the structural shifts happening in technology and culture out loud as thought experiments where you can think along with me. Here's the thing. Don Lemon used to work at CNN. A lot of us know that, but now he runs his own independent media company. And that detail, that fact that he owns his own platform matters in a way that most people aren't really articulating. It's not just about reach, it's about whether his version of what happened will even exist in 6 months from now when AI systems are asked to explain this very moment. I'm coming at this after years of building tech systems and alternative models where existing ones fall short. So I tend to look at technology less as tools we use and more as structures that shape what becomes knowable and what gets remembered and ultimately what becomes real. And what I'm seeing right now is a shift that most people haven't fully named yet, one that fundamentally changes what truth means when AI systems are the one explaining reality to millions of people. So let's walk through this in layers because there's what most people understand about platform ownership, and then there's the part that actually keeps me up at night. On one hand, the conventional wisdom is super clear. Own your own platform, you can't be silent, you can't be algorithmically buried, or no corporation or government can flip a switch and make your voice disappear. That's true, and that's very real. We've seen it happen. Accounts get deleted, channels get demonetized, entire communities scattered when platforms change their terms of service. And in countries with authoritarian governments, this matters even more acutely. Independent platforms can mean the difference between a story getting out or being completely suppressed. So, yes, platform ownership protects against direct censorship. But here's where it gets a little bit more complex. The real risk, the one I don't think we're talking about enough, is that AI doesn't just distribute information anymore, it actually reauthors it. Let me explain what I mean by that. When a story breaks and mainstream outlets delay their coverage, or they underreport the context, or they frame it narrowly through a particular lens, that partial version becomes the indexed record. That's what AI systems scrape when someone asks, "What happened with Don Lemon?" or "What's happening with journalists' arrests?" Those are common search terms that anyone would search. Then those AI systems generate summaries. We've all seen them. They create timelines, they write educational explainers, they build the background and context for future stories, essentially. And each layer of that process moves further and further away from what actually occurred. It's kind of like that game telephone that we all played when we were kids, except it's not just distortion, it's structural omission. Because here's the crucial part: this isn't necessarily malicious, it's statistical. AI systems don't ask who was there or who's telling the truth. They ask what's indexed, what appears authoritative, what's repeated across multiple sources, what's structured in a way that I can retrieve and retrieve easily. So, if your account of events isn't in the record, if it's not machine readable or searchable or even persistent, it doesn't just get ignored by people scrolling through the feeds. It gets erased by the systems that explain the world to people. Not because anyone decided to oppress it per se, because it never really registered as statistically significant. I'm calling this algorithmic omission. It's when truth disappears not because it's actively suppressed, but because it never registered in the first place. Events don't vanish because they're denied necessarily. They vanish because they weren't sufficiently recorded in forms that machines can find, retrieve, and reference. And this is how ignorance scales in the AI age. Not loudly like censorship that people can see and fight, but quietly and automatically through simple math of what got recorded and in what format. In authoritarian countries, you can already see how this plays out. State media dominates the machine-readable record. AI systems train on it, and suddenly that sanitized, state-approved version becomes the neutral explanation that gets exported globally. Not because AI systems are biased towards authoritarianism, but because what's statistically present in the data. But this isn't just happening in authoritarian regimes, it's happening everywhere. Because in the age of AI, what's not machine readable becomes statistically irrelevant. Now, here's what's interesting and maybe a little bit troubling, especially when you think about it a little bit more deeply. The pattern isn't actually new. History has always been written by whoever controlled the recording mechanisms. We just don't always see it clearly until enough time passes. Think about the printing press era. Before centralized publishing houses dominated, you actually had this highly fragmented, distributed media ecosystem. Pamphlets, broadsides, independent printers scattered across multiple cities, journalists competing with one another, multiple competing accounts of the same event often. That fragmentation was messy, but it also meant no single entity could completely control the narrative. Different perspectives survived because they existed in parallel, independently controlled channels. Then consolidation happened. Large publishing houses became the norm, national newspapers, broadcast networks, basically mainstream media as we know it today. And suddenly the historical record started to narrow. Not because truth became simpler, but because fewer entities controlled what got widely recorded and distributed. We can look back on all of this now and see entire movements, entire perspectives, entire communities whose stories were underreported and misframed, really, or just completely ignored altogether. Not because they didn't matter, but because they didn't fit the editorial priorities of whoever controlled the major distribution channels. The labor movement. Okay, the civil rights movement and civil rights organizing, early feminist activism. We have fragments of those stories because people kept independent records, diaries, pamphlets, community newspapers, but the dominant historical narrative, that was written by whoever had the biggest megaphone. What's different now is the speed and the scale. AI doesn't really just consolidate narratives over decades. It does it in real time. And it doesn't just shape what gets amplified, it shapes what future systems will even know to look for. So, owning your platform isn't just about independence from algorithms anymore. It's about ensuring your version of reality survives inside them. It's about making sure that when future systems try to understand what happened in this moment, your truth, your context, your eyewitness account, your framing is actually there in the record. This is also why who owns AI companies becomes increasingly critical, because the systems doing this reauthoring aren't neutral. They're shaped by whoever controls them. And if history teaches us anything, it's that consolidated control over information systems always leads to partial records being treated as complete ones. So what does this mean practically? The question isn't, do you have a blog or are you posting on social media? The question is your truth on the record? Is it machine readable? Is it durable enough to survive platform changes and algorithm updates? Is it structured in ways that AI systems can actually find and reference it when they're building their understanding of what happened? Because if the answer is no, if your truth only exists in inferior stories and posts that disappear and platforms you don't control, it might matter to the humans who happen to see it in the moment, but it won't exist for the systems that increasingly explain what happened to millions of people who weren't there. So I don't know. this is where my head is at. This is kind of what I'm thinking on. I'm still working through this and all the implications. And what does it mean for journalism? And what does it mean for activism? And what does it even mean for somebody working on their personal brand? Or even for anyone trying to document what's actually happening in the world. Maybe the lesson from history isn't just that this happened before. Maybe it's the periods when we had the most accurate, most multifaceted historical records were, in fact, the periods when information systems were the most distributed and independently controlled. I don't know. I don't have all the answers just yet, but I know this. We're living through a fundamental shift in how truth gets constructed, preserved, and transmitted. And most of us are still operating like the old rules apply. Let's keep thinking on this together in the comments. See you soon.